All right, folks. All right.
Well, welcome to the Fall Learning Event on the campus of Texas A&M University San Antonio. My name is Dr. Adrian Guardia, a faculty member of the College of Business, an advisor to this evening's program, POST, our student chapter of the Society for Human Resource Management. Tonight, through the learning event, our students come full circle. What started out as simple discussion among students over a trade journal article inspired and evolved into an ambitious idea. This evening is dedicated to those students and to all students everywhere who dream big. This presentation would not be possible without the support of our partners. And we'd like to thank Texas A&M University San Antonio, particularly our technical services and our communications teams, our College of Business, especially our Dean, Dr. Tracy Hurley, the San Antonio Human Resource Management Association, and of course our students at Texas A&M University San Antonio. We thank you for your encouragement and your support. Serving as our webcast moderator is student project leader for the learning event, Mark Spencer. Mark.
Welcome to Texas A&M San Antonio. Audience, please give us a strong San Antonio, Texas welcome for our panelists. All right, the great nation of Texas. All right. Folks, a couple months ago, what started this was an article in Computer World magazine by Robert Mitchell in July 16th of 2013. His article started with the title of What IT Recruiters Know About You, Whether You're Looking or Not. He talks about the new tools that let recruiters mine the social web to discover and rate tech talent even before anyone goes looking for a job. Now, the article starts out with three companies. One is Red Hat, a Linux open source company. They're the company looking for raw tech talent. The next company is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a professional social media company. The last is Guild. Guild is the social media data mining company. So those are the companies that are presented in this Computer World article about IT recruiting. Now at this point, folks, we're going to be taking some questions from the audience, and we'll be asking those questions to our audience at the end of our event tonight. At this point, I'd like to introduce our panelists for this evening. From Guild Corporation is Brad Warga. Brad is a Senior Vice President of Customer Employee Success at Guild Corporation. Brad joined Guild in 2012. He oversees Guild's client relationships and is responsible for Guild's culture. He oversees the employee engagement and employee operations. He holds 2 decades of human resource and recruiting experience. Now, Brad was Guild's first company, interestingly. He was so impressed by Guild's product and vision that he decided to join the company. That's voting with your feet. From Guild is Brad Warga. Folks.
Thanks, Mark.
Now from
Thanks,
LinkedIn,
Mark.
Welcome. Now from LinkedIn is Tay Scott. Tay Scott is leading global campus recruiting at LinkedIn. She's the global technical recruiting leader with over 10 years of experience, including management of geographically dispersed recruiting and staffing operations teams, designing and building recruiting processes, recruiting innovation, and creating recruiting strategies. She's currently leading the global campus recruiting team in support of hiring hundreds of new college grads and interns every year across all the business units of the LinkedIn company and in every global region. Her specialties: recruiting management and strategies, technical recruiting, college recruiting, investing in employees, and creating future leaders. From LinkedIn, Tay Scott. Hey, welcome, Tay. And from Red Hat is Rebecca Fernandez. Rebecca Fernandez is Senior Employment Branding Specialist at Red Hat. Rebecca brings the company's culture to life in the job market. Rebecca is responsible for Red Hat's voice and messaging and conveying a realistic and authentic expectation to candidates while attracting top talent to their company. She writes content and develops the marketing strategies for their social media, their public relations, and their job sites and their blogs. Rebecca creates messaging for Red Hat's recruiting team. She researches and revises the company's employment value proposition and plans the ad campaigns. She also manages the life at Red Hat's social media accounts and the company's LinkedIn page. From Red Hat, Rebecca Hernandez. Please, welcome. So our panelist tonight from Guild is Brad Warga. That's the social media data mining approach. From LinkedIn, the professional social media base is Tay Scott. And from Red Hat is Rebecca Hernandez, the employer seeking the talented employees. At this point, I'd like to, Brad, would you set the stage for the social media as a new stage strategy for sourcing talent? Brad?
Hey, Mark, sorry about that. I just bounced back, so you lost me for a minute. So, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you fine. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks again for having me on the panel. It's great to be here. And, you know, as you said, I'm getting old in the recruiting space. I've been recruiting technical talent for about 20 years, and most recently with Salesforce.com. And I really think that social media, what we're talking about tonight, is the greatest thing that's ever happened to recruiting. And just want to personally thank LinkedIn for paving the way for all of us. You know, Guild wouldn't be here without some really cool things that LinkedIn has done. So we have lots of friends over there. You know, I think that why is social media the greatest thing in recruiting? Well, we now have access to 200 million people just on LinkedIn, 1 billion people on Facebook. You have Google+, and then you have specialty sites like GitHub and Stack Exchange and Kaggle and all these amazing sites where people are storing public information and public data. And that, you know, recruiting is a lot like shopping. So it's sort of opened up this new world of profiles and talent. And finding talent, discovering talent, finding resumes is not the challenge anymore. I actually think that although social is amazing, it's created three new problems that I want to highlight, and maybe we can discuss this. One is that how do you actually sort through 200 million profiles? Because they're not in any rank order. They're self-reported keywords. So, you know, what does it mean when someone says, I'm really good at Ruby? Or what does it mean if your middle name is Ruby and you show up on a search? So we found that one of the problems that social has created is people have too much data. They don't have a mechanism for sorting the data and using science behind it. The second challenge is that recruiters are not technical, and so in the case of hiring developers and technical talent, they use proxies like where someone went to school, where they work. Everybody wants the MIT grad or the CMU grad that works at Google. But, you know, at Guild, and I'll talk about Guild in a minute, what we believe is for every one of those people, and those are good signals, there are 10 other people that don't have those signals that are just as qualified. And so how do you discover that talent in a world that is still kind of set on searching by keywords? And so I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the third challenge that we're seeing is because recruiters are not technical, they're submitting volumes and volumes of resumes to hiring managers, and it's very inefficient in terms of having hiring managers having to interview 12 to 14 people to get one hire. And so people are looking for more efficient ways to do the matchmaking that happens between a company and the candidate's background. And we're also seeing lower levels of engagement from reaching out to people because recruiters are doing it in a very generic fashion. And so one of the challenges, I think everyone needs to do a better job of that matchmaking and only go after candidates that you know are going to be interested in that particular job. And so in social, it becomes, you know, a little bit of this mass marketing when I think, you know, we need to get back to relationship sales. So this is what Guild is about. Guild started as a way to really help hiring managers and help recruiters sort through all of this data. And we've started with developers, but we're basically able to take not just someone's profile in social media, but we take their entire body of work. We take all of the code they've ever written and stored publicly. We take all the questions they ask and answer on Stack Exchange. We take all their motivations and their interests from Twitter and Google+, and we bring that all into this social profile that we think is going to replace the resume. So at Guild, we believe the resume is dead. And we believe what will replace that is aggregated data from 60 to 80 different social sites that is brought together in a way that really shows a candidate's interest, their body of work, what they're good at, and then using science, you can do that matchmaking. You can actually say, you know, Red Hat is looking for some certain skills, and Facebook is looking for completely different skills. And our algorithms are now able to sort through 6.5 million developers and serve them up in rank order based on what our clients are looking for. And so that's where sort of the big data comes in. It's really the two things. It's social aggregation, and it's also scoring lots and lots of signals, hundreds of signals, not just where someone went to school and where they work. And what's been amazing about this journey over the last year is we have 14-year-old junior high students that are outscoring the MIT grads at 14 because their work is just, they started coding when they were in 6th grade, and they're amazing already at 14, and they certainly deserve a scholarship. And then we have people that are 50 years old that are making a career change using Codecademy or Coursera, taught themselves how to program in Ruby, and you know they're not being discovered because they don't have the right degree or they don't work at the company already. And so our passion is really helping to sort through all the data that's available to help discover new talent.
Wow. Fascinating. Fascinating. Tay, Scott from LinkedIn, would you build on the development of social media as a new age strategy for recruiting talent from your perspective?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, thank you so much for having me. Again, I'm really excited to be here. So in terms of LinkedIn, the company, I guess let me just talk about really quick about the perception of what LinkedIn is and what it actually is. Because when you look at a social media sites by nature they're basically places to aggregate a lot of relationships and facilitate relationships, right? So LinkedIn is definitely in that space, but we're in the professional networking space. And so LinkedIn will definitely, so in terms of the business line, so we've got, it's definitely not a job board. So anytime somebody brings up LinkedIn, you want to be able to effectively talk about the fact that it is not a job board. We have 3 really robust lines of revenue, which is really actually quite different than a lot of standard social media sites. We've got our hiring solutions, marketing solutions, and then premium subscriptions. And all 3 lines of revenue are very different. Our most prolific line of business is our hiring solutions business. And the hiring solutions business is basically the access to the members on our network to employers, right? So enterprises can opt in and purchase licenses to be able to find many of the people in the room today. And so what is really important from a student perspective, or anybody who's interested in professional networking, is when you think about your professional brand, you are the brand. And so your profile needs to reflect your brand. You need to be able to be found. I definitely agree with Brad that it's definitely more than having a list of keywords on your resume. It's more about showcasing who you are and what you bring to the table. And so when we talk to students and when we're bringing students on to LinkedIn, it's vitally important to really understand how you market yourself on any of these social media platforms. And then from a company perspective, from an employer's perspective, so that's the side of people wanting to be on LinkedIn to either create a professional identity or get a professional identity even further than what you currently have. And if you're just starting out, it's a great place to build your network, right? So that's it from the student perspective. And then from the employer's perspective, it's all about who do I want to engage with, and how do I manage the people that I'm actually engaging with? Is it on a one-to-one basis? Is it on a one-to-multiple basis? And how do I track the effectiveness of my employer brand? And so the wave of the future is definitely the employer branding piece, and how a company can actually. So basically, when you look at a social network, it is all about facilitating relationships between either people, products, or companies, or jobs, or whatever it may be. And so when you think about how you can optimize LinkedIn from any perspective, from an employer's perspective, they want to optimize their employer brand by utilizing company pages. From a university perspective, they want to have a university page. And then they want to be able to track all of their alumni. The LinkedIn has definitely dropped a bomb in the recruiting industry. We've revolutionized the recruiting industry, and now we believe we can revolutionize the higher education industry. And so when we're out there talking to career services centers and things like that, they are so interested in being able to track the trajectory of people's lives throughout their careers. And it's just mind-blowing, the ability to be able to track all this data. Ultimately, what it comes down to is a clean set of data that can glean insights either from a company perspective, a school perspective, or a student perspective, or a prospective job seeker. And then there's a multitude of things that the employee or the employer can do to increase engagement on LinkedIn, such as branding themselves, sponsoring updates on the network updates, etc. From your perspective, I'm sure a lot of you are students. From your perspective, I think it's just really, really important for you to figure out what is your brand and then develop an identity on whatever platform you are most interested in. We find that most people want to keep their personal and their professional networks separate. And so we believe that LinkedIn is the professional identity of record, but that's a personal choice, and so whatever brand that you personally want to develop, then it's about showcasing it and being able to be found.
Wow, that's great. That's great. All right. Rebecca Fernandez, would you like to speak from Red Hat's perspective, the end user use of social media sourcing and recruiting strategy? Rebecca?
Sure. So a lot of what Brad and Tay said rings true for me too, but basically we think of social media in a couple different ways. So part of it is there's the data, right? So formerly recruiters really didn't know a whole lot about you. They got your resume, they might have a little bit of other information they could glean from Google searches, but it wasn't like it is now where they could just, put your name into Google and see, honestly, sometimes more than a recruiter even has time to process about you. So what companies like Guild do that's really beneficial to companies that have in-house recruiting teams is they give you a sort of consolidated view of a candidate's social media presence. So I can log into Guild and see, what is this candidate saying about themselves on LinkedIn? What are they saying about themselves on some of the other networks? What are they doing as far as, are they, if it's an engineer, are they committing code to one of the coding repositories? Because we do open source coding, which means all that stuff's public that happens. So there's this whole paper trail that happens. And Guild kind of supplements that. They give you this this score on the candidate. It's based on their own algorithm. And so, we're able to look at even our own engineers internally and kind of run them through Guild, and that was kind of how we did the vetting on it to see, like, is this really a valuable tool? We went and looked at, okay, well, how do they score our engineers? Because we know which engineers are, kind of rock stars in the community. And so that's part of what we get out of it. And Brad was exactly right when he said that the problem now isn't finding applicants. It's kind of just sifting through this enormous pile of applicants to find the good ones. And when you're a company like Red Hat, we're growing so fast. We added, I worked for Red Hat 7 or 8 years ago, and we had about 1,000 people. And last year we added 1,000 people to the company. So it's really just a phenomenal amount of growth, and things are always moving quickly. And so, when you're hiring at that pace, it's really hard to find the right people, and it's really important to find the right people who are going to thrive in that environment, because it's very different from working for like an IBM or for even a Salesforce. It's just a different environment, and so we don't have the time to deal with hiring the wrong people and then having to let them go, or they leave on their own. That's really expensive for the company. It's really disruptive. So it's really important to us that we're getting the right people in the door in the first place. They need to have the talent, they need to fit the culture, and so that's a lot of what social media does for us. In addition to the data piece, it also gives us this sort of real-time ability to get information about what it's like to work at Red Hat out there, so that you as a candidate, when you're researching our company, thinking about, do I want to apply for a job, or maybe you've gotten further down the process, do I want to come in for an interview, that you have a really authentic picture of what it's like to work here, and you're not shocked when you get here and discover, we have a really different culture than, a much larger company might. You're going to be expected to figure things out for yourself, and there's not always going to be the processes in place that might be in place in a larger company. So social media really gives us a lot of those things. It gives us the ability to kind of stay in contact with candidates, and it used to be that people would get annoyed if they didn't get a call back after an interview, but they would just go and tell their friends, hey, don't ever interview at that place. But you as the company, sorry, I've got LEED certified building, the lights go out here after dark. You as the company, you would never know why, you wouldn't know this stuff was happening to candidates, because if you've got 50 recruiters on your team, you just don't always know which ones are dropping the ball on candidates. So what social media does, and because I monitor a lot of our social media sites, I'm able to find out, hey, this candidate in India hasn't heard from us in 3 months, even though he applied for a job, and so I can go and look at that rec, and I can see, okay, well, there are 4,000 applicants to that rec. What's going on with this recruiter? So it really just gives us a lot of different points along the way, and we can communicate with that candidate and say, hey, you know what, let's get somebody in contact and follow up with this person, and make sure that they're really having a positive experience every step along the way.
Wow. Well, I think you've really answered one of our questions we have about what's driving social media and sourcing in recruiting strategies. How about this question? Who are some of the principal players, and what are their prospective roles in this social media recruiting environment? Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I think LinkedIn is obviously the dominant player when it comes to recruiting, but I think Facebook with their social graph is starting to do some interesting things. I think they're starting to look a lot more like mixing that professional and personal. Google Plus, haven't seen a lot there, although there's 600 million profiles on Google Plus, so I think that could be interesting. I think Twitter's probably the most underutilized recruiting tool. I find Twitter to be fascinating because you can actually text mine all the tweets and start to build a profile of what someone cares about. You can also use social listening tools like Radian6. So let's say there's 200 million people in the world, and I know that I really like a certain type of developer that codes in a certain language, and they live in a certain geography, and they make a certain amount of money, years of experience, whatever you're looking for, and you segment that list down to 100 people, it doesn't always mean that those 100 people are going to come to work for you at that moment. And so what you can do with Twitter is you can actually monitor their tweets and their other social media and look for triggers that hit. Things like when they tell you on Twitter that they hate their commute to the South Bay, and that their boss just left the company, and then combined with that, the stock price is dropping. And so those might trigger a recruiter to call that candidate right at that moment and say, hey, they wouldn't try to be creepy and say, I've been socially monitoring you and I want to tell you all this stuff, but they'd say, hey, I just happened to call at the right time, and we're in the city, you don't have to commute down there anymore, and why don't you come to work for us? Yeah, I think so. Twitter, I think, is pretty amazing, and I just want to say on Kay's comments and Rebecca's comments, I don't. I want to. I think it's very important for people to brand themselves on LinkedIn and Facebook and really all of the sites. And I also think it's really important for companies to do the same, because anything that's going to allow better matchmaking, that's what hiring managers want. They want more efficiency in the shopping process.
Yeah, they're looking for the right fit. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with Brad that it's almost like, I think Brad said it at first, that it is kind of like shopping. And unfortunately, I don't quite get the shopping piece of it, but actually I do, because I actually really believe that, like Brad said, that it's a personal choice, right? Like, you have to be comfortable for wherever you're building your brand, and there's a ton of opportunity out there. I think the biggest thing is how are you building your brand, and are you able to optimize the networks to be able to facilitate the relationships? Because again, I really believe, and we really believe, that it's all about the relationships and who you know and how you can get introduced to the people that you want to know. And there's a multitude of avenues that you can do that, and the same for employers, for sure.
I think Brad kind of hit on this too, but for us, a lot of the challenge with using social media in recruiting and sourcing now is that you have so much information that you can access about people, but you also have to train your recruiters to use that information in kind of a stealthy way. So, you know, just because you can go on to GitHub and see that somebody's, you know, talking back and forth about a bug and that they're a fantastic programmer, you don't want to like jump into that conversation in the middle of a community that you're not a part of as a recruiter and say, hey, I've got a job for you, because that's really creepy. People don't like that. Like, they'll just say, get out of here, you don't belong here. But you can take, you know, you can say, well, I found this person and now I can go look on LinkedIn, or, you know, I can look at a more sort of acceptable channel and I can reach out to them there, and I don't ever have to mention, you know, I've been stalking you on GitHub, but I could say, like, you know, I'm really impressed by the work that you've been doing. So some of, I think, the challenge is having this much data, not always making it apparent to candidates that maybe you know this much about them, but it does help you kind of make the case for why you're interested in them. That's really especially true when you get to like top talent, because they are bombarded by people even on LinkedIn. You know, a lot of them actually kind of shut their profiles down because they get too much contact from recruiters. So for you to be able to go in and be well equipped as a recruiter to have those conversations and not just be hitting them like everybody else is, you know, with the sort of generic, I have another Java engineering job for you, but to be able to know exactly what it is that they're looking for, that's really powerful.
Okay. So it sounds like it's real important for the students to pay attention to exactly how they're marketing themselves so that you can find the right fit.
Yeah, and to be thinking about, you know, sometimes just because it's your personal social account doesn't mean the things that you put out there don't reflect on you when you're out there shopping for a job. You know, I can tell you, I'll give you an example. We had a candidate one time who was, you know, entry-level person, and she seemed maybe a little bit flaky kind of during the interview process, but she also seemed really smart, and we were really interested in her. But when I went and looked at her Twitter page, one of the things that came up was she had tweeted, when you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter how you get there. Doesn't matter which road you take, or something like that. And that kind of combined with everything else made us all kind of go, you know, I don't know if this person's really passionate about the job she's applied for, and that's important to us, right? That if you're applying for a job at Red Hat, that you really want to be here and that you're excited and you know this is where you want to be. So I think, you know, little things that you might not think about when you're 23 years old, what you're putting out there on Twitter, but what it's going to look like to an employer. You know, it's not just your personal account. If you want it to be your personal account, then shut it down so that it's not public to the world.
Yeah, hey, Mark, and if I could jump in, I have a kind of a story of, you know, it's on the verge of that creepiness that Rebecca was mentioning, but we had a client, we composed an email. We knew that the person they were going after was the #2 Android developer in San Francisco, which you could imagine probably gets 500 emails a day from people, and so we had to differentiate the company. So we looked on his Twitter. We found out he loves beer and hanging out at breweries. We looked at his GitHub and found out that his last 2 open source projects were to build an Android app that opens his garage door and turns the lights on in his house. And so instead of the generic recruiting email, we said, you know, hey, I love the work you've been doing on Android. When are those 2 projects, the garage door opener and the light switch, going to be commercially available? I'd love to pick those up. By the way, I work at this client where we have beer Thursdays, and we have a kegerator and tells how much beer's left in the keg. You should come have a beer with me and check it out, because I do Android too. And guy 30 seconds responds and says, you know, where and when on Thursday. So that's the kind of personalization that we're talking about.
All right. I guess at this point, this would be a good time for students to consider what they may have put on their Facebook accounts. Maybe
I'm sure they all party less.
One more time?
I said I'm sure they all party less than their Facebook would indicate.
We hope so.
Yeah, but I actually also believe that each of the social media companies has a responsibility to protect privacy, you know, and not invade people's personal, you know, lives as much. And so there's a fine line of social responsibility and quote unquote stalking, you know. So that's why I think it's so important that, you know, what everybody has mentioned today is to pay attention to what your brand is, no matter what site you're branding yourself on.
I guess that's a good lead-in for a question I have here is, what are some of the privacy and liability implications for recruiting and having all this information? Is there gathering and selling this information to client companies? Are there some privacy issues that you deal with?
I'm sure Tay will have a comment. I mean, the difference between Guild and LinkedIn is an opt-in versus an opt-out model. So LinkedIn is an opt-in model where, you know, there's a really good reason for you to give them information and complete your profile. And you know, I tried when I was at Salesforce. I used to try to buy all your data at LinkedIn, and you never sell it to me because I wanted to understand kind of all the other things that you know about people, like who's looking at who and who's checking out this company. Like, I mean, you can tell who's passive and who's active, and that's pretty amazing. But I think you're the only company that knows that. And Guild is an opt-out model, which means that you know, that our clients are interested in understanding people's body of work, and they believe in meritocracy. They believe in really evaluating people based on what they do, kind of like the Moneyball in baseball. You know, it's sort of like, you know, if you had baseball players that said they were great, how would you really know they were great? Well, you'd look at their stats and figure that out. And what we do is kind of provide those stats for our clients. And if they, you know, if our developers are upset about that, or upset that companies are doing a better job of matching their opportunities to these developers, they could opt out.
Yeah, I think from a LinkedIn perspective, everything that we do, our #1 operating priority is members first, and we take that very, very seriously. And so when we're looking, so basically, like Brad said, when you're opting in to create a LinkedIn profile, there are security settings that you obviously have power over. And so those are really important to, you know, basically make sure that you can control your own destiny. For instance, you don't have to be allowing every recruiter on earth to email you if you're not, you know, if you're not open to new job opportunities or networking opportunities. You can opt out of those settings. So there's a lot of different security settings on the site. And first and foremost, we will always err on the side of doing what's right for the member. I know that there's been discussion about products and you know, things that have come up in the past, and every single thing that we consider has to be beneficial from a professional standpoint and beneficial to our members.
I think from an employer's perspective too, you know, you certainly have to be careful when you're looking at everybody's social media profiles. You know, there are all the sort of things you're not allowed to discriminate, right, legally, that you have compliance issues around. And sometimes when you have this much information about somebody before they ever even come into the interview, there's a lot more opportunities along the way for somebody to be inadvertently, or deliberately discriminating against somebody in a way that's not legal. So, there certainly are things you have to be careful about, and you've got to train your recruiters. If you're out there looking at people's pages, you need to be careful with what you're doing, mentally with what you find.
All right.
Yeah, can I just add, Mark, that I think, and I spent 20 years doing this, there's so much bias in the recruiting world today because of where you go to school, because where you work, that, we're trying to, meritocracy is our core value. We're trying to change that so that people can be discovered based on what they're good at, not where they went to school or where they worked in their past. And so in some ways, our goal is to remove as much of the bias as possible that has existed in recruiting.
Okay, all right. Changing a little perspective, what are some of the comparative costs for an employer in retaining employees and maybe trying to do your own searches through some of these social medias versus using a recruiter like Guild? What are some of the cost implications? Each one of you provides a service, and what are some of the cost factors in hunting and finding an employee through these different social medias?
Well, I think of things like Guild as a tool, right? It's another tool for our recruiters to use, and the best tools are the ones that save you time and money. So, if you've got a tool like Guild that helps you narrow down that giant stack of resumes to identify, who are the best candidates, obviously that's going to save you some money because it is expensive if you're going through an outside headhunting agency to try to find these people. That's a very expensive way to try to bring talent in.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to add that from an employer perspective, they're looking at it from the totality of how many avenues do I have access to attract the talent that I'm looking for, or even find the talent that I'm looking for. So, from an employer perspective, they're going to create a strategy that includes a multifaceted either social media outreach or whatever the case is as far as tools. So the cost benefit is definitely at the point where an employer has found a good amount of benefit to, let's just say, the matching algorithm, and it works for them, or the keyword searches that they do and it works for them, then they'll overinvest in those areas. So it's all about the employer investing in the areas that produce the right talent at the right time for them.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking to talent leaders across the country, and I can't remember the last time I met someone that doesn't use LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is everywhere. I think what people are realizing is there's so much data that it's super hard to get a data scientist with a, like we have PhD in cognitive neuroscience, or someone that would look at going to a Google or a Palantir for their job. To get that person and to get 5 computer scientists, just regular developers, to come and work in the recruiting department. So it's not easy to go out and actually have spider bots that crawl, all of these sites. Not LinkedIn, by the way. We won't do any of that. Only public data across these technical forums, and convert it into a common format. Use science to be predictive and to put a score on it. It's not something that I see recruiting departments being able to do themselves for a while.
Yeah, it's a unique, specific niche that requires very unique and specific resources to make that happen. Yeah. All right. Do you anticipate the use of social media will be limited to finding scarce jobs, or do you see it spreading out broader into the broader market?
Well, for us, it's definitely not just the jobs that are difficult to fill. Social media is really helpful when you have high volume roles, so those are the roles that you need to fill frequently. Even if the talent's not that hard to find, you're always trying to find people to fill them. So it can be really helpful with roles like that. Part of to us, part of the value of social media is that you get the chance to tap into the extended networks of everybody who's following you, and then sometimes the people who are following them, depending on how much, how far your kind of viral reach is of what you're putting out there. So if I can say, I'm looking for a recruiter in San Antonio, who has this specific skill, it's probably not that hard to find that person. But if I can put that out there on our social networks and say, is there anybody who can help us find this person, that's pretty powerful. You get a couple of people who retweet that, and it just gives you really the chance to reach people that you might never reach on your own.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe you've already answered this, Brad, but what factors does Guild use in identifying and evaluating talent that you find in social media?
Yeah, the primary thing that we do is we've started with developers because they're probably the most in-demand skill set in the world right now. It's not just tech companies and software companies. It's General Motors, it's GE, it's Goldman Sachs, it's all of these companies across a wide variety of industries that are all reliant on software developers to build their next generation products and services. So developers are in demand, and it was also really good for us because the body of work that developers have, the code projects, are increasingly online. We have about 6.5 million developers where we have a profile and we have code and been able to see the lines of code that they've written, what language they're in. We pull that down, we actually parse it, run it through a series of machines, and we can tell a lot of things about how they've constructed it. We look at the commit logs. We look at a lot of different things in our algorithm, and it basically tells us how proficient they are in that language and how likely they are to pass our client's tech test.
Okay, all right. How much time does it take for a search project for generally to harvest candidates that you present to a client? Is it a lengthy process? Does it take a lot of time to find the candidates for the client?
I think for us it's we'd love to move beyond developers, but as the world becomes more open and more public, I think that opportunity will hopefully be there. But not everybody. It's a little bit harder to think about how would you evaluate salespeople or truck drivers or teachers. So maybe that's going to be possible a year from now, and so we're excited about those possibilities. But moving beyond developers is something we want to do. In terms of the growth of our database or supplying our clients with things, I mean, it's 6.5 million. It's a lot of people for them to go after, and what's been amazing is they all look for different things. I used to think that Facebook, Google, and Twitter hired the same kinds of people, and even LinkedIn, and they don't. So I think there's plenty out there for people, and it's almost like another analogy, fishing. So it's like for a long time everybody's been fishing in one little part of the ocean, in the sort of top 10 schools and top 10 tech company ocean, and there's this whole other ocean out there that nobody's fishing in, and so our clients are excited about that.
Okay. What can new graduates do to kind of identify themselves to each of your organizations? What are some things they can do so that they'll be the right fit?
So I can say from a LinkedIn perspective that so we actually have a new grad strategy. So we pick schools that we want to visit, that we actually have a presence at, and that we want to build brand at. But what's really fascinating with the way that things have changed over the course of time, and more students and younger students getting on LinkedIn, is that a good percentage, a good portion of our hiring has now evened the playing field, meaning that we target certain schools to go and build brand at, and we get a good number of hires from those schools. But in addition to that, we get a significant portion of our hires from using the traditional LinkedIn recruiter enterprise product ourselves. And so in our mind, that's kind of evening the playing field, because we will take any school any person that displays or has the skills desired and passes the bar for those positions. So in terms of a student wanting to have a job at LinkedIn or even position themselves for any company, it's about where you're developing your professional identity and how you're branding yourself, and then simply being able to be found. So, if you've made publications, then make sure that you have your publications listed. If you contribute open source software, code to software, then list that on your professional profile. All of these things help build your professional identity.
For Red Hat, there's a couple different things. The first and foremost is we're really, really concerned with making sure that Red Hat's going to be right for you and that you're going to be right for Red Hat. So for us, it's very much about our company culture. So what you'd want to do is go out there and read, look at our job site, get to know our company, because we have a lot of stuff out there, whether it's on our social media pages or on our career site. We have a lot of stuff out there to really show you what it's like to be at Red Hat, and really decide for yourself if this seems like the right place for you, because it's not the right place for everybody. If you're the kind of person who can't really handle ambiguity, or you get uncomfortable with things that change all the time, if you can't kind of roll with the punches, or it's a really fast growth, always changing kind of place, and that's not right for everybody. Even there are a lot of really smart people who are really successful in other companies who come to Red Hat and fail miserably. So that's first and foremost, is you've got to be right for the company. The second thing is you want to convey to us that you understand our culture, that you would be a good addition, that you really are going to thrive here more so than in another company. And then beyond that, the most important thing that I see people make the mistake when they apply for jobs is they don't apply for a job that they're qualified for. So they don't go out there and look for the one job that we have open that would be a great fit for them. They might apply for 6 different jobs we have open. And if you've applied for marketing, sales, services, and channel partner representative, and 6 other jobs that don't even have that much in common, we really question do you know who you are, what you're good at, what you want to do? It just doesn't look good. So that's a big thing. And then especially with new graduates, what I see a lot of is they'll apply for a job, say you're an English major, and you go out and you apply for a job that's in marketing and it's a writing job. Well, that's great. We can see you probably have the skills we need. But if we go and we looked at your LinkedIn page, and what we see there is that you had all these internships with senators, and you had a political science minor, and what you say on LinkedIn is that you're looking for a job in politics, that doesn't make us think you really want to come work in marketing and writing. Doesn't make us feel like we're your number one choice here. So, that kind of stuff it seems silly, but you'd be surprised. People don't always know. They apply for one job just because it sounds interesting, but they're not, the full picture doesn't convey that they're really excited about that job.
Yeah, Mark, one thing we haven't talked about is just the use of video. I think that what I'm seeing is with companies like HireVue, where candidates are actually filming videos, and companies are now doing video job descriptions. So instead of reading a generic piece of paper that says we're looking for a senior architect of this, actually having the hiring manager film a 5-minute video talking about the role, talking about the culture of the company, and so I actually see video increasing in its use.
From the hiring company, or from the employee or the candidate perspective, or?
From both, and I'd be interested in Tay's perspective on this. I see a lot of companies actually having people complete video interviews, not necessarily real time like we're doing right now in either Skype or Google Hangout, but actually doing kind of recorded interviews to questions, even doing whiteboard sessions that are recorded, and using that to save money in the recruiting process and to also get a better glimpse of who someone is. But then on the flip side, the company actually showcasing who they are in a much more visual way.
All right, introducing the company culture and getting a better understanding. Is the candidate a good fit for that culture? Is that the correct understanding?
Yeah, I think for both sides, it's the candidate actually gets to present a more real image of who they are, what they're passionate about, their skills, and the company actually gets to show you what it's like to work there. And so in the past, you had sort of 2 pieces of paper, and it's really hard to figure that out from paper.
Yeah. Is LinkedIn going to start doing that?
Yeah, I'm not privy to that information yet, but or at all. but I do know that I definitely agree that the use of video will increase. The thing that needs to really be thought about there is from an employer standpoint, what's the optimum length of time that somebody will actually click on a video and glean a good amount of insights from that video, and what makes it worth the employer's time to actually produce a video like that, or is it more stream of consciousness type of videos that connect more with the audience? And so I think that's all to be determined in the future. But yeah, I definitely see a lot more people trying to use video, companies like InterviewStream coming up in the ranks. And I think employers are just trying to figure out right now where it fits in the process and how it fits in the process and how to optimize it.
Yeah, we actually do a lot with video at Red Hat for our employment brand. We've got a YouTube channel and a number of videos that feature different Red Hat employees and kind of the interesting things about their jobs, and some of them about the different offices. And it's really good content from a social media perspective. When we put that stuff out there on our Life at Red Hat channels, whether it's on Facebook or Twitter, people love it. They want to watch it. They share it with their friends, and it's a really accessible format. But Tay's exactly right. There's considerations like we know 90 seconds, that's about the max amount of time somebody's willing to watch a video, and it's challenging to get a good video together that says a whole lot in 90 seconds.
From the student perspective, though, I would say, or the employee perspective, somebody who's looking for a job or wants to put rich media on their profiles, there is now the opportunity to add rich media to your profiles, which I actually think is so compelling, because you can showcase yourself, your profile, your interests, who you are, in any capacity on your LinkedIn profile now, which I think is actually really helpful and beneficial.
Okay. All right. I think one of the things I'm understanding is an employee candidate really wants to pay attention, like you said, their branding. And let's take, for instance, in LinkedIn, the relationships and connections you make. Do you see that, and is that impactful in their relationship building and in your candidate selection process? Do you see those connections?
Yeah, so we refer, there's many ways that you can look at the way that we find candidates, or that we connect with candidates. And one of the ways that we are looking at right now is the concept of social referring. So basically using the network to tap into, so in our minds, there's no reason at all to ever go into a meeting or a business meeting or an interview or anything as a cold call. You can tap into your network to find out who are you meeting with, find out information about them beforehand, where, anything that you have in common with them, and just leverage the network to be able to, go in warm versus cold. And that goes on both sides. And then LinkedIn's grand vision, if anybody's ever heard Jeff Weiner, our CEO, talk about the grand vision of ultimately being able to create the world's first economic graph. So we hear a lot about Facebook's social graph. LinkedIn in the future could have the capability of connecting every open position on the planet with a skill set. And so when you look at the implications of that and how to facilitate the movement of people and facilitate introductions and relationships, it's quite a compelling story for the world, in fact, connecting, making the connection to people so that they can create economic opportunity for themselves and everybody else in their network.
Yeah, I would just say to the students, it's not the number of connections you have, it's really the quality of your connections. And I do think referrals are key to all companies, and so social just enables that even more, because when our new hires would start at Salesforce, the first thing we would say is, let's look through your LinkedIn or your Facebook and what friends do you have that you'd like to recommend. And it's so much better to have them reach out to their own network than to have a recruiter reach out cold, to Tay's point.
I think, too, that's something maybe students might not be aware of, is how much we are able to see, when you're on LinkedIn, we can tell who we have in common with you. So if you come and you apply for a job and there's somebody who's already at Red Hat who you have, a first or second grade connection with, we're going to kind of ask around and see, do they have an impression of you? And, if I ask somebody about, hey, so-and-so just applied for a job here, I see you guys are connected on LinkedIn or Facebook, and their response is, that kind of makes me pause and say, well, I don't know if I want to bring that person in for an interview. So I think sometimes people don't realize that the interactions you have with people every day, if you're connected with those people on a social network, or we can tell, you're connected to somebody who's connected to them, the world's a lot smaller now than it used to be.
Okay, so we don't want to be just connecting with everyone that asks.
Well,
unless you're really a person, I don't know.
We have somebody internally who defined it as, I connect with anybody that I know or who I want to get to know. And that's his basic premise of how he connects. Anybody that I know or anybody that I'd like to get to know.
I take it we want to take a very different approach. All right. Let's see here. I think let's look at our time. How are we doing? Got 4 minutes. Could we take some questions from our audience? Sir, what's your question?
Well, I have a quick one. For the video concept that Guild determined that they will be using, how do they associate that with perhaps some companies out there that may take advantage of it, and they have particularly like some biases? Because if a candidate is in a video presented to them, then if they have like a physical imperfection or an age variation between too young or too old.
Okay, so your questions are relates to how is that video going to be used?
Well, we know how it's going to be used.